Hi, this is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, with Sheldon Richman, the vice president of the foundation, and this is the Libertarian Angle, the show here on the internet that gives you all the libertarian perspective on the burning issues today, the perspective that you're ordinarily not going to get in the mainstream press, the mainstream media. What we're going to be talking about today is immigration, and specifically the immigration bill before Congress, both in the Senate side and the House side. And Sheldon's going to give you the details of the bill, but I just want to point out here that this is just one more in a long series of crises, immigration crises that we've had really since I was a kid growing up on the border there in Laredo, Texas. And it's a classic example of Ludwig von Mises's principle of interventionism, that one government intervention inevitably leads to new interventions to fix the problems with the previous intervention. And it would be difficult to find a better example of this phenomenon, with, I guess, the exception of the drug war, where we've seen the same sort of thing. But I mean, every time they pass a new reform, they say, oh, well, this is going to now solve the problems. And, I thought that's what that Berlin fence was supposed to be all about. I thought we weren't supposed to have to deal with any more immigration crises. And I remember, many years ago, maybe it was in the 70s or 80s, where they said, well, if we just finally make it illegal for American employers to hire illegal aliens, that'll finally solve the problem. There won't be any more jobs for them. And, of course, crisis after crisis after crisis. And so the latest crisis is, developed into this new bill with respect to citizenship and status and so forth. And so I'm going to pass it to you, Sheldon, to explain to people, what are these bills really all about? What are they purporting to do, and what's wrong with them?
Well, you have the bill that's come out of the Senate last week, and it's headed for the House, is the product of this group of senators known as the Gang of Eight, led by Democrats like Charles Schumer, and on the Republican side, you got Marco Rubio. And Rubio is of that wing of the party that says if the Republican Party is going to do well in national elections, particularly the 2016 presidential election, it's going to have to look like it's on the so-called right side of the immigration issue. So there's division in the party. So the House, which controls which the Republicans control, won't give this bill an easy time. So the bill is a product of kind of two wings. One that says, look, if we can really, quote, secure the border, we're willing to put up with some kind of pathway to citizenship for the so-called illegal aliens. I just think of them as people without government papers who are already here, which I think they number at 11 or 12 million people. And because there is this sort of sense among both parties, at least one wing of the Republican Party, that it's not really good or it's not healthy for the society to have 11 or 12 million people who live in the shadows, right under the threat of the INS, or what we call ICE today, the ICE, the immigration authorities. And so there is this sort of consensus that's come up that it would be good to have a way for these people to live out in the open. Of course, they also throw in and pay taxes and things like that. So we're looking at potential taxpayers. So you have one wing who says, okay, we'd be willing to take that. We do think that's a good thing, but there must be strong measures to not let new people come in. And the other side is willing to, who cares more about bringing those people out of the shadows than border security, is willing to say, okay, we'll pay, that's our price. We'll accept the border security in return for this pathway to citizenship. So you have this coalition of two sides that have different emphases, right? One on security, one on bringing, sort of almost like a civil rights issue, bringing people out of the shadows. Nobody, of course, is talking about free immigration, which we'll get onto in a second, I'm sure. So anyway, this bill is sort of an amalgamation, but some people are unhappy with it. They say, well, there's not enough emphasis on security, or security doesn't really come first. It seems to come second to the pathway, and the other side is saying, no, we put in all kinds of stuff about security, and therefore you shouldn't worry about that. Now, what it does do is it calls for 700 additional miles of fence on the border. There's already some 650 miles, I believe. and 20,000 more immigration agents and other sorts of things like electronic surveillance, surveillance drones, cameras, etc. That's what they threw to the security people, right? They claim this is the biggest bolstering of border security in American history. They claim it's already very high, and that the illegal immigration has slowed down. In fact, they even say that the out-migration is about roughly equal to the in-migration, so it's a wash. So they're claiming, quote, progress on that. And then on the other side, there's a pathway to citizenship, but the person has to come out in the open, has to pay a fine, has to pay back taxes, et cetera. So it's a typical statist approach to things, which you and I, Jacob, will not be happy with.
Well, it's just, to me, it's just their classic central planning mentality. That they honestly think they have, they have what Friedrich Hayek called the fatal conceit. That they purport to have the requisite knowledge, these members of Congress or whatever immigration board is going to finally carry this thing out, to plan this complex, intricate system of labor and tourism and travel and immigration. And the result, of course, is what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. I mean, you have this perpetual series of chaos. You have all these people coming in, wanting to work, get jobs, and working in the shadows, oftentimes being threatened by employers that, if you don't do this, I'll deport you, or I'll send you back, or report you to ICE or whatever. I mean, it's a terrifying existence for people that are just really trying to better their lives. And then you end up with these weirdly constructed proposals like, well, we have to make everybody citizens in order to bring them out of the shadows. And then we have to strengthen the border because then we have to keep new people from coming in who would think, well, wow, if I move in, I can be made a citizen too, ultimately down the line. I mean, it's just this whole barbed wire entanglement that comes about. And, you mentioned about what the libertarian position is. I mean, compare it. We have long favored open borders. It's the only solution that works. I mean, people say, oh, you libertarians aren't very practical. What do you mean not practical? We propose the only thing that works, that will work, and that is the free movements of people. Immigration, as you know, Sheldon, has nothing to do with citizenship. People can live in a country and travel and trade and have businesses and just retain the citizenship of their own country. We've seen that with the million or so Americans that live in Mexico. They retire there. They retain their American citizenship. They root for American sport teams. They don't learn Spanish. They don't assimilate. Who cares? And so you have this natural system with open borders where people come, they work, they retain their citizenship. They're free to apply for citizenship if they want, but a lot of times they just here to better their lives, make a little money, and send them back. And so there's a natural harmony that exists in a free market immigration system as compared to this nonsense that we see every 5, 6, 7 years that inevitably comes up with their latest proposal.
Yeah, I think if people were free to come here, and of course we're not specifying what other changes might happen. I mean, assuming like everything else stays the same, but there's open immigration, and people come and settle and work, it's not unnatural to think that they may at some point decide they'd like to become a citizen. If they're going to live here and they're planning on living here indefinitely, and think of it as permanent, they may say, well, yeah, okay, I want to vote. I want to vote for, who's the president or who's the congressman. It's not a crazy prediction that people will think that way, but that's fine. That doesn't bother me. I know some people think that people coming from outside the country are more apt to vote for the welfare state, but I haven't seen any reluctance on the part of the American people to vote for the welfare state either, so I don't quite see a huge distinction there. The thing we need to break through on, where most people will immediately disagree with us, and I don't think get any further until we, break through, is that they think state sovereignty, well, they believe in state sovereignty, they believe the country is sovereign, and they think that what goes with that is some organized control over who gets to come in and to stay, more or less permanently. Not so much tourism, because that's by definition temporary, and a person's planning to stay a relatively short time and then leave. But as far as coming in to settle, for most people, it goes without saying that that is a power that belongs to the state, which in their view is acting in the name of the country or the people. So that's where we have to break through, this whole idea of state sovereignty. And until we do that, they're going to think that libertarians, don't get it. Of course that power goes along with, that's what it means to be a country, as people would say. That's what we have to rebut and refute.
Well, yeah, I mean, but as we've seen domestically, you can have sovereignty with people free to cross into that sovereign jurisdiction. In other words, the immigration status, they always bring this thing up of, borders would disappear with you libertarians. You don't believe in borders. Well, that's just nonsense. I mean, you take, for example, Virginia and Maryland. There's a border between the two states. Mostly it's the Potomac River. And every day people are free to cross back and forth between these two states. Nobody keeps track of it. Nobody's monitoring. Nobody watches the numbers. Nobody's asking, why is there this gigantic movement of people back and forth? Well, the border doesn't disappear. The border remains there. People are simply free to cross into Virginia, and they're subject to the sovereign state of Virginia's laws. Same way when they go into Maryland. So we have this enormous free trade and free movements of people zone across the United States, where people are free to go move into California if they want more welfare, or they're free to move from New York to Texas, even though there's culture differences there and so forth. And I think the biggest obstacle is the psychological one, is that people just can't envision that same principle internationally, where people from France could come in and you go to the airport, land, don't see any customs or immigration officials, pick up their luggage and just move about and go about their business. I mean, we don't even know really in our daily exchanges with people who's a citizen and who isn't a citizen. This doesn't matter. And we see this phenomenon in the EU countries where, the immigration status predicted these horrible things were going to happen when borders were open between those countries. Today, none of those things happen. People are free to go from Italy to France, get jobs. They retain their Italian citizenship unless, as you say, they want to apply for a citizenship change. And in that sense, I have a friend who's Japanese. She's lived here for some 15 years. She loves the United States. She has no plans on returning to Japan. And she retains her Japanese citizenship. And I would say most of the people that interact with her, they don't know that. It's like irrelevant. And it's irrelevant to her. She's very happy retaining her citizenship and staying here. So, the point is that in a free market system, there's this natural harmony that exists within people, the same type of harmony we see domestically when people cross state borders and enter into new state sovereignties.
Yeah, well, I think people regard the states in the United States as different from the country. I mean, they don't really think of the states as sovereign. I mean, there are some people who still maintain that view towards states, but I don't think the average person does. First of all, there's been so much of the federal government making, putting demands on states and requirements and unfunded liabilities. I mean, for most people, I don't think they think that. So for people crossing, from Maryland to Virginia, I don't think they see that as the same as people crossing from Mexico or Canada into the U.S. Especially in terms of settling permanently. It's one, a visit again be something different. But I think they already assume that that's something that the U.S. government monitors. And when they learn that they're not monitoring it, I think people do get upset. That's why there is this big push for some kind of bill. Unfortunately, they're not seeing things our way, and we have to keep the pressure on to convince people of exactly what you said, that this is coming and going by people or permanently settling is fine, and they shouldn't be afraid even of citizenship. Well, I mean, if the idea is they're going to come in and vote for bigger government, well, like I said, plenty of Americans vote for bigger government. That's a separate battle. We have to simply fight the idea the government should be involved in all kinds of, of our personal affairs, monetary, and otherwise, personal morality. That's a fight we have to fight, no matter where the threat comes from, whether it comes from people moving to the country or people who already live in the country. That's a separate fight. People want to somehow address that through immigration. I don't see how you fight the welfare state by opposing immigration or free immigration. when Milton Friedman said that we can't have free immigration as long as there's a welfare state, I think he made a huge mistake, because what you don't want to do is save the welfare state from all the stresses and strains that are naturally going to occur to it. Because if you save it from the stresses, you're helping to save the welfare state. It's better that it suffer the stresses. And let people rethink that, thinking, well, look, we can't sustain the welfare state because of its natural consequences, so let's rethink it. Instead, if you kind of make it look like it's not suffering those stresses by attacking immigration, for one thing, then you extended the life of the welfare state. So why do we want to be on the side of the people who want to extend the life of the welfare state?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think that's one of the most popular ones that we hear, the objections to the libertarian position in favor of open borders is, oh, they'll go on welfare. Well, you know, I have never, ever, in all the years I've been on this good earth and watching this immigration war, I have never, ever heard of one single immigration raid on a welfare office. They're always on private businesses, because private businesses is where the illegal aliens are. They come here to work. They don't come here for welfare. They come here to make money, send it back to their families. And they're the hardest working people in the world. I mean, there's a logical reason that American employers love to hire immigrants, because they work hard. They have a strong work ethic. And so you got American employers risking being caught and so forth, because these people are such good workers. And all they're trying to do is just enter the country and improve their lives. And so when people say, well, but some of them are coming on welfare, my response is, well, why do you want to punish everyone for that? I mean, you want to punish innocent people that do not want to come on welfare? Oh, you know, why lump everybody together and punish the innocent with the so-called guilty? You know, focus in on denying a welfare to immigrants. I would have no problem with that. I mean, I think they'd actually benefit from not going on welfare. I don't think welfare is a good thing. I think it creates a dependency mindset among people. But I would also say, how about exempting them from the taxes that pay for all this welfare junk? I mean, it seems to me that if you're not going to, if you're going to deny them welfare benefits, well, then why should they be funding it? And finally, I in that regard, Sheldon, you know, we libertarians, we're known for our devotion to principles. We stick with our principles. We're not like conservatives and liberals that will abandon their principles at a moment's notice or when their man's in the White House and so forth. And I think we should take much caution before we ever permit the statists to maneuver or manipulate us into embracing the statist position. And that's what they do with this welfare state, they think. They say, you libertarians have to now come with us statists, and join us with our statist immigration policy and initiate force against people that are trying to get into the United States to better their lives until we get rid of the welfare state. Or my position is, not on your life. We're sticking with our principles. You are the ones that favor the welfare state. You deal with it. And hopefully you have to deal with it by dismantling it.
Yeah, and what you just said reminded me of something else. I mean, and this is particularly true of conservatives, where they don't like, they're not comfortable with the idea of a pathway to citizenship. They may be willing to accept it in a deal to get more, military or agents on the border, but they're not really comfortable with it. And the thing that shows that is they like to say it's just not right that a person's first act with respect to the United States is to break its laws, to get in, to come to the country in violation of the law. I always found that a little weird, because I thought that some conservatives at least would admire someone who showed initiative and defiance of a government edict in order to make life better for himself and his family. It seems to me that's something we would really want to admire in a person. That shows initiative. It shows enterprise. It's the kind of people you'd want to welcome first, because they would be the first ones to come. They're not sitting passively saying, oh, I hope the U.S. government one day lets me in. These are people doing something. So I don't know why they don't get admiration rather than scorn. The other thing, there's this old Latin maxim from the natural law theorists. It goes way back, back to Plato, that an unjust law is no law. And therefore, I would say to the conservatives that breaking an unjust law meaning a piece of legislation, is not the same as breaking the natural law. And so to come into the country before getting permission from government is not a crime. And this is why, the conservatives like to cry out that this pathway to citizenship really amounts to a form of amnesty, and they say we're against amnesty. And I like to join in and say, well, I'm against amnesty too, because amnesty implies that somebody has done something wrong and you're forgiving them. You don't forgive somebody if they haven't done anything wrong. So if you're talking about amnesty, it's a way very patronizing. Like, okay, you did something wrong, but we're so merciful that we're going to forgive you if you pay a whole bunch of money. That's what the so-called amnesty comes to. I'm against amnesty because I don't think they did anything wrong. Yeah, they broke a legislative edict, but that's not the same thing as capital L law, meaning the natural law, which reflects, individual rights, human rights, individual dignity, and those laws, as Lysander Spooner said, those laws that violate individual rights and freedom and justice don't count as law, and therefore they don't need to be amnestied. They just need to be welcomed and be able to come out of the shadows and live without fear of being arrested by ICE or cops or anybody else.
Yeah, that's a great point because, look, you had segregation laws and we heard the same kind of arguments as well. The law is the law and the black has to go to the back of the bus and it's just a law, work within the system, lobby your congressman, write letters and so forth. Well, unjust laws, as you point out, are not deserving of respect. They're not deserving of obedience. They are deserving of violation because they violate fundamental principles of freedom and morality and human decency. And the same thing with respect to these immigration controls. These people that wish to come to our country simply want to better their lives. And I was many years ago, I was practicing law down on the border, and I was representing some clients in the detention center, and so I asked the local sheriff if my cousin and I could put on a Christmas show, and my cousin was a rock and roll star, and so the sheriff says great, and so we put on this Christmas show. But in the middle of the show, he sang all these nice songs, and to the illegal aliens, Mexican songs. He was singing in Spanish, and so it was bringing a lot of tears to their eyes. But I got up there and gave a little speech during one of the breaks and told the inmates there, I said, you're not criminal. They're making you think that you are a criminal because you're in this jail, but you're not a criminal. The real criminals are the people that enforce these laws, enact these laws, interpret these laws, and are that part of this system. And I think that's what we libertarians bring to this debate. We bring the higher law, the moral law, the God-given law, that's inscribed in every human being, and I don't think you could find a better example of this than these immigrants that are just wanting to improve their lives through labor. What's wrong with that? Well, there's nothing wrong with it. And I'd also like to point out, Sheldon, that, with my experience on the border, is the police state environment down there. If people have never been to the border, man, I invite you to go down there, but take your papers, especially if you're dark-skinned, because they've got domestic passport checks inside the United States, away from the border, away from the actual border. If you leave Laredo and head north, about 40 miles north, you think you're crossing the border again because you run into this surreal Soviet-like inspection facility that makes you think you're still in Mexico. And they got them also on the east-west interstate highway in Arizona. This is just standard Soviet Union, communist Cuba type stuff. Everywhere you go in Laredo, you see DEA agents, ICE agents, customs, immigration, roving border patrol checkpoints. It's a little police state down there, and that's where they're heading the rest of this country with this junk.
Yeah, I was amazed when you described even east-west highways have border checks. It's not even north-south where people are coming, north from the border. Just moving east-west, you can get stopped. That really stunned me to learn that. That brings up another way I'm against amnesty. As long as people are being against amnesty, you gave a whole list of oppressors, right? The people that write the laws, enforce the laws, blah blah blah. All those people, I'm against amnesty for them. Those people are guilty of harassing and oppressing innocent people, and I would not grant them amnesty. Those people should face justice.
Yeah, I think so. They've been doing this for decades. I mean, I've seen this since I was a kid. I grew up on a farm on the Rio Grande, and we hired illegal aliens. It wasn't illegal to hire them back then, and they were the hardest working people. I mean, and they were our buddies. I was a teenager. We'd play football with them. I'd eat dinner with them sometimes, and bale hay with them, and the immigration officials had the power, the authority to enter onto our farm. We had to give them a lock to our gate, a key to the lock, and they could enter onto our property without a warrant because we were on the Rio Grande. And if they caught our workers, they would just take them and just deport them to Mexico. And then one time we never saw them again because if they tried to get back in, and the second time they'll get them with a felony and so forth. And then finally they end up passing this law to make it illegal to hire illegal aliens, addressed to people like us and to American businesses and stuff. And their rationale was, well, this is the key. Will finally solve all the crises because there won't be jobs to be had. And, of course, that developed a whole new concept of false IDs and false Social Security numbers. And then they end up with this Berlin fence down there, which is an absolute disgrace to the United States and our heritage. And we should also keep in mind here our heritage of open borders, Sheldon. I mean, from the time the United States got established all the way up to the late 1800s, for all practical purposes, there was open immigration at Ellis Island. Okay, sure, a little tuberculosis inspection or, something like that. But otherwise, people were free to come to this country. And it was even more so in the Southwest, after the United States absorbed the northern half of Mexico, along with all its Spanish-speaking citizens, in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. People were free to cross back and forth into what had previously been their country. They could come and invest and open businesses, and they just retained their Mexican citizenship. But there was this natural flow of people until, gradually into the 20th century, we ended up starting this war on immigrants. And, of course, one of the big starters of the war on immigrants was Franklin Roosevelt, who used, his welfare state as the excuse to start deporting people.
Right, in the 20s, and then you get the Chinese Exclusion Act, you get limitations on Jews coming from Europe, Eastern Europe, and which later on, a decade later, turned out to really show the nature of such things, because many people who died in the Holocaust would have not have died had those 20s legislation not been passed. I think we have to mention that it's really outrageous that people who claim to believe in private enterprise favor a system that tells employers who they can hire or who they can't hire. And so before you can hire somebody, you got to run their name through, Vericheck or whatever it's called, and there are sanctions and penalties threatened if you hire the wrong person. These are people, I can't believe people who believe in a free enterprise support such a system. And the other thing we need to mention is, and you did allude to it earlier, that this kind of system, the current system, and it won't change much with any new system they come up with, is that employers are able to exploit employees because you can always just turn them in. You can always just call ICE and say, hey, I found somebody without papers on my property, and then he can get shipped back. So an employer can make demands on such a person that they could never make demands on a person who had legal status, who was just, free, because that person could quit and find another job. But that's not so easy when you're living in the shadows. So it gives a huge amount of power, which ultimately flows from government, to employers over their workers. And I think that's criminal, and we should be outraged about that. This is a massive violation of individual rights, or what they like to call human rights. Same thing. It's a massive violation. We shouldn't put up with it.
Yeah, I saw it on the border growing up. There was a lot of middle-class families that had maids that were illegal aliens, and some housewife would get mad at the maid, and she just would call immigration and come and pick her up and wouldn't pay her. And that's what this system does. It leads into exploitation of these workers. And you've written some great stuff on that at the Future of Freedom Foundation's website. And your point about the Jews is fantastic, too. I invite people to Google Voyage of the Damned. that talks about that famous German cruise ship that was filled with Jews that they couldn't. This was in the Nazi regime, right before World War II, and they wouldn't let them disembark at Havana Harbor, and then they came up near Miami, and the Roosevelt administration said, no, we have immigration controls, and we're not going to let them in. Man, your point about the free market, it's just absolutely amazing to me that you have, especially conservatives, that preach the principles of the free market and limited government and so forth. You couldn't find a better violation of the principles of a free market, a free enterprise system, than all these controls on private businesses. Why can't businesses use their money the way they want it? It's their money, it's their property, it's their business. If they want to hire a Guatemalan, a Frenchman, an Englishman, or an Argentinian, that's what freedom's all about. That's what private property is all about. Anyway, that's the show. We're about out of time. Thank you, Sheldon. Enjoyed it again, and come and visit our website at fff.org. Like us at Facebook. We're putting a lot of stuff there, and then subscribe to Sheldon's Twitter account, and my Twitter account, and the Future of Freedom's Twitter account. We're putting a lot of great stuff out there too. And you guys have a great 4th of July, and thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.